The U.S. Institute of Peace, Vietnam War Legacies, and Reconciliation Initiatives, and the work of Chuck Searcy. That is our topic for today's video and podcast. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcast. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact dependent. Hi, everyone. This is Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney, mediator, and arbitrator from Houston, Texas.
And I am Natalia Łowska-Czajka, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland.
And I'm Thomas Giglione, originally from Toronto, Canada. I'm here in Hanoi, Vietnam. I'm an arbitrator, mediator, and peacemaker. And I'm inviting here as our special guest, Mr. Chuck Searcy, who also happens to be in Hanoi. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yes, thank you so much, Chuck, for coming today. So this discussion today is one that's very interesting to all of us because we are all peacemakers. Thomas, Natalia, and I were mediators who work every day to help individuals and businesses, small organizations, make peace and resolve their conflicts. But you've been doing something a little bit broader. You've been doing that sort of work, but at a more diplomatic level, at a macro level, working with the US and Vietnam as they have made peace over the last few decades. So I wanted to start off with just reading your bio real quick to introduce the audience to you. Chuck Searcy is a founding member of Veterans for Peace Chapter 160 in Vietnam, and he is the current president of the Vietnam chapter. Mr. Searcy is an international advisor for Project Renew in Quang Tri province, an initiative to make Quang Tri safe from the threat of wartime bombs and mines. Since 1995, Mr. Searcy has represented the Vietnam Veterans of America Foundation, or WAF, Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, WMF, and other NGOs and affiliated organizations in Vietnam. Chuck co-published a weekly newspaper in Athens, Georgia, worked at the U.S. Small Business Administration in Washington under President Jimmy Carter, and in the U.S. Senate for 2 years. For 6 years, Chuck was executive director of the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association. A U.S. Army enlistee in 1966, Chuck was an intelligence analyst in Saigon from June of 1967 to June 1968 and spent his last year in the Army in U.S. Army intelligence in Europe. Mr. Searcy has lived and worked in Vietnam since 1995 and on the continuing legacies of the war, Agent Orange, and explosive ordnance, or EO. Chuck is a recipient of Vietnam's National Friendship Medal. So, Chuck, thank you so much for meeting us today and for discussing the work that you've been doing over the last few decades. So can you yourself, in your own words, go ahead and share a little bit about Project Renew and some of the work that you've been doing in Vietnam?
Thank you, Mike. I'm very happy to be with you today. I think my experience in Vietnam is probably similar to what all of us go through at different times in our lives. The outcome is quite different maybe from the expectations. When I came back to Vietnam to work and live here in 1995, more than a quarter century after the war, when I was in the Army in 1967, 68. In 1995, I thought that I would be here for 2 or 3 years on a simple, not simple, but a well-intentioned and important and uncomplicated humanitarian project, providing high-quality orthopedic braces for children with polio and cerebral palsy and other childhood illnesses and diseases. I never imagined that that would evolve into a much broader agenda that had to do with reconciliation, yes, and with peace and with friendship and forgiveness. All of these elements and emotions that are inevitably connected to war and to post-war experiences, but I didn't imagine that that would become an important part of my life. But it has become very important to me. And it sort of occurred gradually as I was working at the Children's Hospital in Hanoi and Bach Mai Hospital on this orthopedic braces program. I began to see in newspaper reports and on television every week that there were accidents all over the country involving kids and farmers and villagers who were blown up by bombs and mines left over from the war. Some of them killed, some of them injured. In fact, the total number of Vietnamese post-war, after 1975, when the war ended, who have been killed or injured by bombs and mines is more than 105,000. And we think that's a low estimate. There's probably more than that. That's a painful number. That's a huge number, a significant number for people in a time of peace to be facing this threat every day. And I have not been the only veteran here. There have been a number of American veterans who've come back for short or longer stays in Vietnam and to make their own contributions. But many of us felt the same way, which was that we Americans surely have some responsibility for helping the Vietnamese deal with this problem. Most of the bombs and mines, and ordnance, and explosive ordnance dropped from the air and from artillery guns was ours. We had massive tonnage. In fact, more than 5 million tons of bombs were dropped on Vietnam during the war. And much of that did not explode as designed. So it's been lying in wait all of these decades to kill an innocent child or to cause the loss of a leg or an arm or an eye. And it was a menace that needed to be dealt with. At the beginning, to be honest, the US didn't have much interest in this, but I think it was because of a lack of awareness. And the Vietnamese early on were too polite to really put this on the table as an issue. However, they were encouraged by us, Americans, other veterans like myself and American citizens who were living in Vietnam, all came to agree that this is our responsibility. We need to be helping the Vietnamese. And the fact is, nobody disagreed. Nobody could disagree. And so out of that evolved this willingness to cooperate and a very surprising amount of friendship and goodwill among veterans and among government officials and among ordinary Americans and Vietnamese who were living in Vietnam or who were traveling back and forth. And so that evolved into a structured program of determining how extensive the danger really was and where throughout the country, and what could be done practically, efficiently, and cost-effectively to deal with it, and how we could save lives of this generation and future generations and prevent these terrible injuries, which are lifetime disabilities. So I shifted my emphasis in 2001 from the orthopedic program in Hanoi at the Children's Hospital in Bach Mai and started working in Quang Tri province with another veterans organization, a sponsor, dealing with the problem of bombs and mines. And through the auspices of a project called Project Renew, which is still going on, and we're just about to celebrate our 20th anniversary. And we've made great progress and done a lot of which I'm very proud, but I owe all of the credit to the Vietnamese who have really managed this program and directed it and really brought about the result that has made Vietnam a much safer place today. So that's kind of a long version of how I have arrived at where I'm at this moment.
Thank you so much for this explanation and for explaining to us how it worked with stemming from the explosive ordnance and the threat to people into the friendship with between the veterans from the US and Vietnam. And Thomas, you are based in Vietnam now, and you are actively involved into peacemaking projects. How this awareness of the work that Mr. Searcy is doing affected your work? What your engagement into that was? How did you meet?
Great. Thanks for the question. I really want to acknowledge Chuck Searcy and people like him and organizations for the work that they do. A lot of people don't realize the war ended almost 50 years ago, 1975. And after the war, there were about 500 to 1,000 people that were killed every year because of bombs that would go off. A total of over 8,500 people have died since after the war. About over 30% of those people were children. Now, there have been no deaths because of the great work that Chuck is doing and people like him since 2018, so almost 3 years now. But you know, before Chuck started his work, there were about 500 people a year dying, mostly children, and that's because of the work that he's done. He's, you know, that's gone down to zero, and I really want to acknowledge the work that he's doing, and I think, you know, it's wonderful. How I met Chuck was 4 years ago, 2017. I convened the largest mediation conference in Southeast Asia in Da Nang. So that's what, almost 4 years ago in Da Nang. Da Nang is in the central part of Vietnam. That's actually where the border between the North and South Vietnam was. And it was around the same, it was during the APEC conference where Donald Trump met Putin, I think, for the first time. And we held a mediation conference there. And we invited nominations for acknowledging peacemakers. And Chuck Searcy and his organization Renew and Project Renew won the first prize for the peace building initiative. That's a picture of Chuck, my presenting a check to the organization. Just to let you know that the organization's NGO is also looking for donations to help the organization to continue their work, their noble work in what he's doing. So that's how we initially met, and I haven't kept up with Chuck since then, but you know, I'm very much involved with the grassroots peace building and training in this sector in Vietnam. So I've been in Vietnam since, not as long as Chuck has, since 2010, you know, look forward to possibly collaborating with him on some peace initiatives on an international scale, with, you know, collaborating with the U.S. government and United Peace Institute to do more work here in Vietnam, especially through education and such.
Tom, if I may clarify one point. You mentioned the number of casualties is 8,500, which is the number of deaths in Quang Tri province, one of 63 provinces in Vietnam. The total number nationwide since the war ended in 1975 is around 38,000 deaths.
Wow. I didn't know that. Yeah. So that's over 1,000 deaths a year since the war, after the war. At least 1,000 deaths, maybe 2,000. And you said about 30% are children, or were children?
30-40%, yeah, children.
Yes. Wow, that is so tragic.
Also, the other point you made is very, very important one, and that is, you know, everybody sort of worldwide assumes that the answer to this problem is to clean up every bomb and mine. Nothing else will do the trick. It's got to be done. Every bomb and mine has to be disposed of. that's not true, because that can't be done. It's not practical. It just cannot be done. There's just too much of this lethal ordnance all over the globe, including in Vietnam. What makes a lot more sense is creating an atmosphere, an environment, a context in which people understand the problem, they understand the threat, they know how to live in safety, protect themselves and their families, and know how to report this ordnance when they find it, to allow a disposal team to immediately come to the site and destroy it or remove it safely. And those tasks go on day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. And altogether, since this effort began in Quang Tri province, and Quang Tri is the center of this effort because it's the most contaminated province in the country. The former site of the DMZ, the dividing line between north and south, as you mentioned, just above Da Nang. And so most of the work has been done there, but now it's beginning to spread out in other areas. And altogether, Project Renew teams and Norwegian People's Aid, MAG, Peace Trees, other organizations that are working there, have cleaned up and destroyed more than 700,000 items of ordnance just in the last couple of decades. Project Renew is responsible for about 20% of that. But an important part of this effort is risk education. That is teaching the kids and the adults, the villagers, the farmers, how to recognize the ordnance, to understand the threat, how to report it so that teams can come and clean it up. And so the community working together has brought the rate of casualties down. And as you mentioned, Tom, since 2018, the last 3 years, we're now in the fourth year of zero casualties in Quang Tri province, zero accidents, not a single accident or injury or death in the last 4 years. And that's after 100,000 people have been killed or injured going back to 1975. So we can't stop. We have to continue because the effort must go on. But at least we now know how to manage the problem.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you. And this is the reason I want to make sure that people know your website and where they can go and help in any way they can. So if you were watching the YouTube version of this recording, then you would have seen the screen shares. If you're listening to it, you can, of course, go back to mediation.com/blog or /podcast. Or just visit the YouTube channel and check out the visual version of this. But I'll go ahead and say the names as well. So you have renewvn.org and landmines.org.vn. So those are the two websites that you run. And again, those are renewvn.org and landmines.org.vn. So
and Mike, those are linked. So I think if you just almost you put in renew, and then those should pop up.
Got it. And we're definitely going to be pasting those links onto the description portion of the video as well. So if people just want to go to the video and go to the bottom, you'll be able to see the links and quickly get to them. All right. Next question, Chuck. The willingness and the pressure to deal with war legacies like the MIA issue, bombs and mines, Agent Orange, which came from veterans and ordinary citizens. Did that push the U.S. and Vietnam toward reconciliation, cooperation, and understanding? If so, in what ways?
I think it did push the U.S. and Vietnam toward conversations, dialogue, and actions together to a greater extent than anybody imagined. I'm not sure that the early delegations of American veterans who came back to Vietnam fully understood the importance of what they were doing. They did it out of a gut feeling that it needed to be done. There needed to be some kind of reconciliation with the Vietnamese and with the former enemy, because the war was beginning to be acknowledged by most people as a terrible, terrible tragedy, a terrible mistake, wrong in every way. And the Vietnamese had suffered much more than we had. So there were some veterans who tentatively reached out to explore the possibility of talking and cooperating. And the response was powerful and embracing and overwhelming. And out of that grew a larger movement that was led in some way by veterans, but veterans were never exclusive. Veterans always invited everyone to come into the fold and work together. But veterans, because of the prior experience in the war, had a certain level of credibility with everyone, Americans, but also Vietnamese, that allowed our voices to be heard. I remember the first time I had this conversation, and I've had this conversation many times now, but asking a Vietnamese veteran who had lost a leg and was living with that disability all of his life, how could it be that the Vietnamese were so open and so welcoming and so embracing of us Americans, former enemies, soldiers who had caused such damage and such destruction in their country? And he said what many other people have said to me. The war was terrible. It was a terrible, tragic mistake. It was wrong. The US government was wrong to do this. But that was a US government decision. The American people did not make the decision to go to war with Vietnam. He said, we consider the American people our friends. And eventually the American people forced the US government to stop the war. And so he said, we have great admiration and respect for the American people. And it's easy to set that aside and say, well, that can't be so sincere, but it is, because I have heard it so many times from so many Vietnamese. It's a genuine sentiment, and they feel it very, very deeply.
Thank you so much for that. And does, therefore, this post-war story of Vietnam and the US provide an example for other countries where wars or conflicts have occurred or occur? Are there lessons to learn from our experience here?
I think there are very valuable, important lessons that we all can learn. I know that I personally have learned so much from the Vietnamese, from living and working here. I've learned a lot more about myself, about America, about our place in the world, about the mistakes that we've made. And I've learned how inspiring a small, poor, and disadvantaged country of genuinely good people can be so powerfully beneficial. The Vietnamese people and the Vietnamese, Vietnam as a country, have set a very good example for the rest of the world. They have been invaded, they have been occupied, they have been colonized, they have been brutally treated by so many outsiders, going back hundreds of years, going back centuries, including the Chinese, the Japanese, the French, the Americans, the British even played a role, and
Mongolians. Mongolians.
Mongolians.
Yeah.
After each conflict and after each occupation, as the Vietnamese threw out the invaders, which inevitably happened, sometimes it took decades and sometimes it took a couple of centuries, but they eventually cast off the invaders and the occupiers. And they did it with a spirit of forgiveness that is amazing. In fact, in one of the famous defeats of the Chinese by the Vietnamese, when an army of 200,000 Chinese were defeated by an army of 70,000 Vietnamese and they surrendered, the Vietnamese, with great graciousness, marched them back to China under full military escort, with elephants and with boats and with wagons, and turned the army over to the Emperor of China, expressing their loyalty and friendship to China, and implying that they did not wish to embarrass China in any way. And so they've had this amazing ability to quickly get beyond past conflicts and look to the future. My lesson from that is that I grew up in the South in the US, and I grew up in a very racist society, and we still have racism in the US. It's a terrible problem. I've tried to do better over my life, having learned quite a lot from many people that I respect. But it's the kind of thing that is very difficult to shake off, and you have to be taught those things. The Vietnamese people teach their younger generations forgiveness and openness and embracing of other people and treating other people as equals. And they know that whatever happened in the past cannot be changed. You can recognize what occurred, in some cases respect the sacrifices of those before you, but you can't change it. Those who've been lost are lost. What you can change is today and tomorrow and the future, and build a better life for future generations. And the Vietnamese focus on that. It's been a very valuable lesson for me, and one of the many things that I've learned from the Vietnamese.
Thank you. And this question goes to both of you guys. A lot of Americans aren't familiar with USIP, the United States Institute of Peace. Wanted to share my screen real quick, and just to bring up the USIP site specifically as it relates to two things. One is the Vietnam War Legacies and Reconciliation Initiative, and the other one is the online courses that they actually offer on their academy. Could both of you guys speak to USIP's work and how it interplays with the work you both have been doing?
I'll just jump in for a minute and say that I'm really humbled by the work that Chuck does, and I will do whatever I can to encourage and facilitate more reconciliation in the work that he does. I'm also an educator. I do mediation training, and part of reconciliation is learning from mistakes. And part of what Chuck does is not just making sure to remove ordinances and bombs and such, but also educating the children to the risks and identifying threats. So we learn from mistakes, and so part of reconciliation is education. So the United States Peace Institute has a great website with online courses that have self-paced micro courses on various areas of education. Many people, and the war was over 50 years ago, but we can never stop learning some of what the lessons from what other people had paid the price for. So basically, a lot of the courses, if you go to the website, are very, very interesting for educators, and I really recommend to visit it. I'm looking at having some of the courses translated to Vietnamese and facilitating workshops in these types of courses. Courses in mediation, conflict resolution, grassroots mediation, to also commemorate September 21st, which is the National Peace Day, which is a worldwide event that United States Institute of Peace is promoting.
Thank you. And Chuck, how does USIP interact with the work you've done?
Well, we have not interacted much directly. They had a very good conference a while back in Washington, D.C., which participants included ministry people from Vietnam, defense and other ministries, foreign ministry and the embassy, and also U.S. Officials and U.S. citizens. And that was a very good conference. And in fact, I think the USIP has had actually quite a few quite notable conferences. I need to learn more about what they are planning to do and what their options are, what's their guiding framework is, because I'm very hopeful about this organization. They have an adequate budget, I think, now from Congress. Of course, when your budget is determined by Congress, you also have to be sort of careful about what you do with the money. So that's a constant worry. But I would like to see them become a bit more bold in their advocacy for peace, for disengagement in conflict areas, without so much sensitivity to how it's going to affect the feelings of a given government in any country. I think they could then play a much more important and influential role if they would occasionally take a hard stand and say, this conflict needs to stop, and the fault is on both sides or more than one side, and we will play our part in trying to force a disengagement. That, of course, strays over into other departments such as state and defense. I understand that. It's not an easy thing, and it's sort of an idealistic suggestion. But I would like to see the Institute of Peace really play a more prominent role in advocating for peace in these troubled spots of the world.
Thank you so much. Are there cultural and social threads in each of our countries that have contributed to improve friendship and respect between the two governments, the Vietnamese and the US governments?
That's an interesting question, and Tom may want to embellish this, in fact. But one of the things that I've noticed since I've been in Vietnam is the pervasive and really quite positive influence of spiritualism in Vietnam, primarily through the Buddhist organization, but also through the Catholic Church, which is a minority group, and there are other religious sects as well. But I would say the Buddhist influence is the most pervasive, and seems to me has been quite positive in fostering an attitude of conciliation and understanding and peace. And the Vietnamese are very serious about that term. When they use the term Hòa Bình, which is peace, they mean it. It's not a throwaway term. It's not a campaign line. They treasure peace. They consider peace as precious, which is an interesting Vietnamese expression. So I think their spiritual heritage and their sense of community and sharing have really played significant roles in encouraging the government to adopt that kind of attitude too. And even high officials in the government are not embarrassed to talk about peace and love and reconciliation and friendship among all nations. And Vietnam, frankly, is one of the few nations in the world that can claim to be friends with every nation in the world. They have no enemies.
Mm-hmm.
Thomas, can you follow on that? Are you aware of any cultural and social threads of that kind that are bringing the two countries together?
Yes, I think it's just a lack of awareness. That's where education comes in. I'm a commercial mediator, and whenever I mediated a commercial dispute, for me, reckoning comes from the word "I am sorry," a genuine acknowledgement of reckoning, and being educating yourself about the suffering from the other side, the other person's perspective, and that is all through education. So I want to also acknowledge Mac and Natalia here that for inviting Chuck and I to speak about this, because I will use this podcast as a tool to connect with the powers that be at United Peace Institute to make them aware, because government is very large and very nebulous, to make them aware and to get them not just to shake hands, but to actually do something that is very proactive at the grassroots level here in Vietnam, to create awareness. Because 50 years ago, many people who are watching this podcast right now were not even born at that time. But there is opportunity for all of us to learn, and for all of us, learning is a lifelong experience. And Chuck, I really want to acknowledge you and in the work that you do. And Mac, Natalia, thank you very much for inviting us to raise this awareness for this very, very critical issue.
And we would like to thank you both, gentlemen, because especially for me, but also for Mark, me being from Poland, the country where the Second World War started, we do have heritage of remembering how it can be living in the war conditions, losing members of the families, remembering about them, celebrating the anniversaries of all these very deeply concerning events. And we border Germany, the country that started the Second World War. That was and used to be very painful for many of our citizens. Please remember that the Jewish community here was very severely destroyed because of that. They were our fellow citizens. And the process of reconciliation was a long one, but leads to very impressive effects. And me being born in the country with no war for more than 70 years now, I feel privileged. But there are still so many countries in the world suffering from war and its consequences. There are so many tendencies around the world not to respect peace, that any project regarding that and any work that you two are doing is very, very appreciated and very necessary to show to the younger generation what they can contribute their efforts, their mindset to create long-term peace all around the world, and starting within the families, starting within the circles that they surround them. And this is also what we want to do by means of mediation. This is why bringing peace via mediation, via all the alternative dispute resolutions, bringing peace between people is so important to us. So thank you so much for giving us your precious knowledge and insight into the topics we covered.
And I want to thank the three of you for the work you do, because the mediation, I think, is too often does not get as much attention as it should as an option to legal actions or conflict resolution. That too many people look at every situation as either a win-win or a win-lose situation rather than a win-win situation. And in mediation, I think you do a wonderful job of bringing people together and finding common ground and resolving conflicts and helping to create win-win situations.
All right. Everyone, thank you so much for your time. Of course, we went over, but we knew we were going to because this topic was so interesting. And everybody who's listening, come back until next time. And we're wrapping up. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.